With the NHL draft quickly approaching tomorrow, today we are going to do our top 10 for this year's NHL draft. We are going to be doing a mock draft of the top 10 for the 2025 selection. So, we're going to start off at 10, work our way down to number 1. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think this year's NHL draft will look like. Now, this is going to be an interesting situation because I think there's going to be a lot of teams moving draft picks in the top of this year's draft. So right now, with the way this is based, the top 10 selections are what they are. But I think there's a very real possibility at least one of these top 10 picks gets traded on draft day tomorrow on the draft floor. I really think it's going to happen. Maybe it's a team that I'm really desperately hoping gets somebody from the local area to bring in. But we're going to discuss all of that because I think there's a lot of things to kind of consider here. And there's a lot of teams that are willing to move their draft picks. And I think that's kind of a sign of I think it's a combination of a lot of teams don't know where a lot of these guys are going to fall. I think a lot of guys in this year's draft, especially even at the top, it seems like nobody really knows. Like, there is no Connor McDavid or next year Gavin McKenna. Like, it's not a for certain guarantee that number 1 ends up being the guy we think it is. It's just that kind of a draft. And I think a lot of teams are willing to move a top 5 pick in this year's draft, thinking that next year's picks are going to be better and they can get a lot of value for this year's draft pick. Meanwhile, the perception is that, maybe this year's draft class is slightly weaker than it normally would be. So it's going to be an interesting thing, but we're going to start off at number 10 with the Anaheim Ducks, currently with that selection. And this is a player that I think fits kind of the DNA of what the what the Ducks are trying to go for. You remember those Anaheim Ducks teams in the mid-2010s going on those deep playoff runs. They were tough, big, gritty, powerful teams. And I think a guy from Brampton of the Ontario Hockey League could be a really good fit for what the Ducks are trying to build there. And that is right winger Porter Martone. Porter Martone, he's a right-hand power forward. He's already 6'3", 204 pounds at 18 years old. He has a really good scoring touch. You look at his points last season. He had 98 points last season with the Brampton, is it the Brampton Beast, I think? He's a really big type of player. And, a lot of people have compared him to, maybe in his heyday, a guy like Corey Perry. Very similar type of DNA in this player. And I think that's fitting because Corey Perry was a Anaheim Duck back in the day. I think this is a similar type of player that, the Ducks could be getting from Porter Martone. So that's our number 10 selection. At number 9, the Buffalo Sabres might take somebody that I think a lot of people see going in the top 10, but it seems like kind of a hit or miss whether he's actually going to be in the top 10. And the Buffalo Sabres are going to go off the board here, picking up a guy from Sweden's Djurgården of the SHL. That is right winger Victor Eklund. I think this is a really good young player. He's a little bit of the inverse of what we just talked about with Porter Martone. He's 5'11", 169 pounds, 18 years old. He is a different type of player. His dynamic is much more about the skill and the speed. And I think for the Buffalo Sabres, I think that's a player that they should be willing to take a chance on here, especially after losing J.J. Peterka. I know that Sabres fans don't really want me talking about that right now, but I think this is that type of player that you're instantly trying to get back in the draft. And he can score. And I think that's something that he can play a little bit gritty, but that's not really what I think the Sabres are going to ask of him on this Sabres team. And I think he's the type of player that, again, you can't have enough scoring, playmaking players on your team and speed. And I think that's something the Sabres could use. I think that's a guy that could really fit in well there. They do have a couple Swedes already on the Buffalo Sabres, at least before any of them get traded or moved. But I think Victor Eklund could fit in quite well with the Buffalo Sabres. The only defenseman that I have going in this top 10 is the Seattle Kraken. And we know Ron Francis likes to draft his defensemen. And this is a little bit of an off-the-board pick. I think a couple people have this defenseman going in the top 10. He's the top defenseman that a lot of people see other than Matt Schaefer toward the top 10. Maybe there's another one like Jackson Smith, who I'm sure Seattle could consider with this pick as well. But I think they're going to go here with Radim Murtaka. Murtaka was talked about maybe being a number one defenseman at one point. Things have definitely changed a little bit for Murtaka's development, but I think he's still going to be a really good addition there. And Seattle does have a couple of really good defensemen already, but again, you just traded for guys like a JJ Peterka. And oh no, that's Utah. So I apologize for that. I think the thing right now when you're looking at Seattle is they have a lot of middle of the road, like middle six, bottom six type of forwards, and everyone's complaining about that. I think they're going to try to address that issue in the offseason, whether that's a trade or some type of player that can come in now. That's why I think with a guy like Murtaka, you're taking the best player probably with the highest ceiling at that spot. And I think they're going to go and address that type of adding that big name player to the team. I think they're going to try and do that through other means, whether that's signing somebody or just trying to find a way to bring somebody in. I don't see them right now as a team that is going to look for a guy 5 years from now that could be that good young winger. Those are always nice to have. I think they should really try and focus on adding probably who is going to be a quarterback on the blue line on the right side nonetheless. There's a really good defensive prospect, and I think Seattle would, I think any of these teams really should be considering, outside of the top three probably, I think there's a lot of consideration. He could even go in the top five, depending on how things go. So if Seattle's able to get him at 8, I would say that's a pretty good selection for the Kraken. At number 7, we have the Boston Bruins. And you're going to see another similar type of DNA from this type of player, and that is Jake O'Brien. Jake O'Brien, this will be the first time the Bruins are selecting in the top 10 since 2011. It has been more than a decade since the Boston Bruins had a pick in the top 10. It's pretty crazy, but they're going to be trying to go and get a playmaking, also a little bit of a he's got the offensive game, but he's also really good at playing in his own end and coming back and back checking. And that's Jake O'Brien. And I think Jake O'Brien, another guy from the OHL, from Brantford, he's a right-hand shot, 6'2", 177. He could probably put a little bit more, more meat on that body, but still, at 18 years old, this is nothing really to be concerned about for him. Tied for 7th in the OHL with 98 points. He had 32 goals, 66 assists. He had a really solid season. He was named the OHL Rookie of the Year last season, the 2023-24 season. So there's a lot of upside with Jake O'Brien. A lot of people have compared him potentially to the type of player of a Wyatt Johnston on the Dallas Stars. I think that would be a real nice pickup for the Boston Bruins. And again, as they're kind of transitioning from the team that they were into the team that they hope to become, you consider the kind of nucleus that the Boston Bruins can build, especially with a guy here like Jake O'Brien. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to go in that direction at number 7. So now, number 6. Number 6 is kind of an interesting one because we've got Roger McQueen. And this was a tough one. I was kind of at the last minute considering whether Boston would take Jake O'Brien or Roger McQueen. And then I was kind of thinking, I'm like, well, the Flyers go ahead of them. So if I'm the Flyers, would I take Jake O'Brien or Roger McQueen? I think Roger McQueen is going to stay in the top 10 here. I think, and based off of what we're looking at here, I think if James Higgins and Caleb Denoye are both taken off the board already, which in my scenario here in this mock draft, they are. Unless those two guys are available, I think then it comes down to Roger McQueen or Jake O'Brien. I think it makes a lot of sense here. I think, again, you're trying to add more of a younger forward group. They obviously tried addressing that already, bringing in Trevor Zegras for the now, but I think they're going to be looking to make even more changes adding up front. And I think adding a guy like Roger McQueen is really going to help them on that mission. Another really solid young player, and I think this is one that some people even have going in the top 5. Roger McQueen, another guy from the OHL playing it. Oh no, he played in the WHL, the Brandon Wheat Kings. He's already 6'5", 198 pounds. He fits the bill of an Eric Lindros type of Philadelphia Flyer at that young age. I think the biggest concern that maybe we see a guy like Roger McQueen slide in this year's draft. Apparently, he had a fracture in his back. He only played 17 games last season. So, if there's a guy I would say that could be a top 5 pick, but could also potentially be one of the early gems in the second round between picks like, 33 to like 40. I could see him falling that low. It is going to be very interesting the way teams kind of think of Roger McQueen, but that injury thing definitely gives people a little bit of pause. He was a full participant in the NHL Combine, which is a good thing, and I think that's going to help them out in being able to get this done. But this is one that the Flyers, if it works out, they're going to really like. If it doesn't, though, it could blow up in their face. And I know a lot of Flyers fans are immediately thinking of what happened with the Nolan Patrick draft. When Nico Hischier went first to the Devils, Nolan Patrick, who for all of that season, and what's even more scary about this is, Nolan Patrick was also a member of the Brandon Wheat Kings, also had an injury in that draft class going into that draft year. So there's a lot of eerily scary similarities between Roger McQueen and Nolan Patrick, but it's got to work this time, right? So we're going to go with Roger McQueen to the Philadelphia Flyers. A lot of pause, I'm sure, for Flyers fans thinking about that now, but we'll see. So at number 5, this is a really interesting one because this is one that I think if the Islanders are to step up and make a trade for either the 3rd or the 4th pick, if they don't find a way to get something done with either Chicago or Utah, Barry Trotz is going to get James Higgins down to Nashville to play for the Nashville Predators. James Higgins is a really talented hockey player, played with the Boston College Eagles last season. At 5'10", 186 pounds, he is not one of the bigger players in this year's draft, right? Obviously, compared to some of the guys we just mentioned already. He had 9 points, he had 5 goals, 4 assists, and averaged over 20 minutes of ice time during the World Junior Championships, the IIHF. He played really well there. Second straight gold medal, playing center on the top line. He's a pretty good hockey player. Another one, though, that there is concern because of there's things about James Higgins that I think as things went along last season, we saw him as the foregone conclusion to go first overall till pretty much the last 2 months before the draft. All of a sudden, it was a question of if he would be a top 5 pick. And I think he is going to stay in the top 5. And I think Nashville is going to take that big swing for him because the potential is very high on James Higgins. This is another guy that I think when you consider the Islanders here, right? And this is not, I don't want to get too far into this. If the Islanders want to do what they need to get done here, they have a contract with Noah Dobson coming up. They might look to trade J.G. Pajot. He's a year away from being a UFA. If the Islanders take Matt Schaefer first overall, you end up having him replace Dobson on the blue line next season, potentially. And you also get, maybe in some kind of trade, you find a way to get James Higgins. I think this is something that if I'm the Islanders, you find every way where he's not available at 5 for Nashville, because I do think Barry Trotz would take him if he's still there at 5. But I digress. I think we've talked enough about James Higgins here. We'll discuss that in other videos, and hopefully once the draft comes, we'll find out what actually materializes. But as of now, I think he's going to go to the Preds. At number 4 is the Utah Mammoth. And with their new name and their new jersey, I think the first player we'll see in public wearing that jersey is centerman Caleb Denoye. This is another really good player that'll, for most of this season, has been projected to be a top 5 player. He played with the Moncton Wildcats of the Q, 6'1", 182 pounds. A lot of comparisons to him, and really good comparisons. Alexander Barkov, Jonathan Toews are just to name a few of the type of player that we could be looking at here. He got the Mike Bossy trophy as the league's top pro prospect, which is no slouch. That's obviously a big deal. You just consider the type of talent he'll be playing with on that Utah team. That top 6 has some really good, not only like veteran players, but a lot of younger guys that when you consider with the combination of some of the younger prospects they already have drafted over the years, like Cole Beaudin, Tisha Ginla, Daniil Boo, and then you consider that on top of Logan Cooley and Clayton Keller and Dylan Gunther. This is a team that you add a guy like Caleb Denoye down the middle, the sky's the limit for this team. A lot of people have also been comparing him to like a Nico Hischier, obviously not the same nationality and things like that, but I think type of player you're looking at here with Denoye, I mean, I think it's going to be a very heavy consideration if he should go even in the top 2 or 3. I think there is going to be some teams that take some pause to that because I think he is very talented, and I think this is one that Utah, if they're able to get him at 4, I think they would be quite happy with that selection. And then that leads us now to number 3. Number 3, with the Blackhawks selection, this is going to be our first Swede off the board, and that's going to be from Djurgården of the SHL, and that is Anton, not Lundell, Frundell, just to confuse everybody. But the good news is he's not going to be playing with him on the Panthers. At least I don't think so. He is going to go to the Blackhawks. This is a good pick for the Blackhawks at number 3 for a multitude of reasons. You're trying to add more to that center core. You already look at some of the players they already have. I mean, they do have Connor Bedard on this team. But then you consider guys like Frank Nazar that are also down the middle. And some of those really good defensemen that they have that are kind of developing, like Del Maestro. I think there's a lot of things for this team going in the right direction. And I think as the draft has gotten closer, there's consideration that he even goes at number 2 to San Jose. That is how high people are thinking of Anton Frundell right now. And I think in some combination, this is going to be like the top 4 we're talking about. I would bet money that this will be our top 4. Unless James Higgins comes into the conversation for the Islanders, this top 4, in terms of really what we're looking at here, it has to be some combination of Denoye, Frundell, Misa, and Schaefer. It's going to be in that order some way or another. And then everything after that gets a lot more kind of blurry. So when we talk about Frundell, like I said, another guy, he loves being on the power play. He's going to score goals on the power play. But this is a guy that maybe needs a little bit more development. I think that's the one concern about Anton Frundell. He's already 6'1", 204 pounds, but I think in terms of the game, he's going to need a little bit more time to develop, and I think a lot of these guys are. Again, when we consider this year's draft, there's a very good chance it ends up being like the Owen Power draft, where we see maybe one of these top 5 players make the team out of camp next year. And, we saw even Owen Power with the Buffalo Sabres. He went back to college to play at Michigan for another season. I don't know necessarily if Matt Schaefer is going to do that for the Islanders, but that is something that could be on the table. And Matthew Darsh and the Islanders will figure that out. And maybe I already gave away number 1 because we're kind of talking about it. But I think at number 3 here for Anton Frundell, I think this is a great fit for Chicago. And if he doesn't go number 2, I think he'll be quite happy going to the Chicago Blackhawks to play with Connor Bedard. That sounds like a pretty powerful 1-2 punch down the middle. And then that's going to lead us to, speaking of guys down the middle as your 1-2 punch, very similar situation for the San Jose Sharks. You've got Macklin Celebrini as your top guy, and I think Michael Misa from the Saginaw Spirit from the Ontario Hockey League is a perfect number 2 on the San Jose Sharks moving forward. Now, I know there's a lot of consideration that the Sharks really want Matt Schaefer. They really want that defenseman to play. You've got Celebrini up front and Schaefer on the back end. It does not look like that's going to happen, but this is not a player that I think you go to the podium and you're disappointed with selecting. This is a very good hockey player, and I think when you consider what Michael Misa can bring to the table, he is I would argue, is the most threatening goal scorer in this draft class. And, you look at the comparisons that he's, a lot of scouts have been comparing him to guys like John Tavares, Steven Stamkos. I mean, those guys in their prime were something special. And Michael Misa has the potential to be similar to that. 134 points, 62 goals, 72 assists in 65 games. He was almost a goal per game, which, obviously that's normal for guys that are playing in the CHL, but still, that's pretty good. And then he's got 21 power play goals. Just think about what he could do alongside Celebrini on the power play. That is dangerous. He's also really good in the faceoff dot. He won 51% of his faceoffs last season. This is a guy that he is multi-dimensional. And I think when you consider the fact that his hockey IQ, his poise on the ice, all of that stuff is together, this is one that could be playing in the NHL in the fall. I think his development and with where the Sharks are at as a program, as a franchise, I think there is a very good likelihood Misa ends up being the guy playing for the Sharks in the fall, and some of these other guys maybe get another year of development. I think Michael Misa, he might be there in the fall for the Sharks. And then that leads us to number one, which I already kind of hinted at. And I mean, let's be honest, who am I really kidding here? Like, if the Islanders are really going to do the crazy and go after a guy like James Higgins, they're going to try and trade for that draft pick. This is a non-starter for me. It's not even a conversation that I'm trading the pick, and it's not even a conversation that I'm taking the best player in this year's draft. You do not get many opportunities to do this. This will be the Islanders' fourth time ever drafting first overall. Dennis Potvin, John Tavares. Does anybody remember the first one? Leave in the comments down below. Who was the Islanders' first overall draft pick in, I think it was their expansion year, before they drafted Dennis Potvin. It was the year before that. I'll give you that hint. But let me know down below. So this will be the Islanders' next number one player. And it has to be Matt Schaefer from the Erie Otters. He is the top defenseman in this year's draft. And there is concern in one sense, and we talked about this earlier with Roger McQueen, is he only played 17 games last season, but he is still the consensus best player in this year's draft. Now, he did have a broken clavicle. That is concerning, but I think, especially when you look at bigger defensemen like him, 6'2", 190 pounds, I think the thing you're more concerned about is more along the lines of if he had like a knee injury, a leg injury, an ankle injury. Like those would be more concerning to me. A broken clavicle, it's probably a little bit harder for him to work out this summer, but I don't think that's really going to ruin him and his development as a player. Elite skating, dynamic offense, can quarterback a power play. He's already strong. Like I said, at 190 pounds, at 18 years old, that's pretty good. I think he's really good at handling himself at his own end. He plays a very good 200-foot game, which you have to do as a defenseman. Kills penalties. Is going to be a quarterback for the power play, which I think the Islanders have desperately needed. And you consider what Tony DeAngelo and Noah Dobson and, God heaven forbid, Scott Mayfield was on the power play at any given moment. Those guys are not anywhere near the level of what they are getting here with a guy like Matt Schaefer. This is the type, defensemen, elite defensemen like this do not come around often. And when I think of the draft when the Islanders selected John Tavares, a lot of people were considering that the Islanders should go with Victor Hedman as that first selection. He ended up going, I think it was second or third overall, to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And that was a guy that year one was not ready, but look what Victor Hedman has done in his NHL career. He is a juggernaut, a top-tier defenseman. That's what the Islanders could be getting here with a player like Matthew Schaefer. And I think it's not even an argument. Like, Matthew Darcy has been saying this week that they don't even know who they're selecting and this and that, but that's a bunch of BS. They know who they're selecting. Everybody in the world knows who is going first overall, and it's got to be the kid from the Erie Otters, which is Matthew Schaefer. So that is going to wrap up our top 10 for this year's draft. I'm hoping this is not the order, because if that is, that means the Islanders don't get James Higgins. I think Matthew Darche is going to do everything in his power to figure out a way to get this player to the Islanders. And you got to remember, the Islanders have Noah Dobson. The Islanders have Jean-Gabriel Pageau. They have this year's Colorado first-round pick later in the draft. So the Islanders have pieces. Now, is it enough to get a deal done for the third or the fourth overall pick for James Higgins? Maybe, maybe not. But we're going to find out. And I'm very interested to see how the cookie kind of crumbles for the Islanders. And, even teams like the Flyers. I think the Flyers, this is a really important selection for them. Coming out of the Tortorella era, this is a big deal for Danny Briere. This is a really big opportunity for him to really go out and get a big-name player. The Flyers, like I said earlier in the video, have had some struggles in the draft recently. You look at Nolan Patrick and, things not working out with some of those guys. And then other guys it works out really well, like, Maxim, Matvei Michkov, right? It totally depends. Things can change in every given season. Guys that are projected to be top 10 end up falling out. Guys that are first overall end up never really playing. Things happen. This could be a bit of a weird, wacky draft. And we've seen it recently. The Ducks took a very interesting approach a couple years ago with their third overall selection, selecting someone that was supposed to go in the middle of the first round. Ended up going top 5. Ended up going third overall to the Ducks. So this could be that type of draft as well. And when you look at some of the guys we mentioned here, like there's a lot of good things to like in the top 4, really top 5. Let's include James Higgins in that conversation. But then you start to go past 5, and no disrespect to those other guys, but we don't know what's going to happen with those guys. And it's just very much a when you see guys on the eye test and when the GM is selecting, they have to have the full trust of their scouting staff to know, like, this is the guy we should take. We've seen enough of his tape. We've seen enough of him in person. This is a guy we should really consider. But that's difficult, and that's what makes you think when we get to, the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th pick, it's not a surprise to me that Boston, Seattle, Buffalo, and Anaheim, all those picks are basically in play. Teams are willing to trade those picks because I don't think any of those teams are fully committed. Like they're going to tell us on the draft floor on draft day, this is the guy we always wanted and this and that, like they always do, and they should. But I think at the end of the day, those picks are definitely on the table, and that includes the Sharks, Blackhawks, and the Mammoth. I think all of those picks are very much in play. So I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments down below. What do you guys think of this year's draft? Let me know your picks down below as always. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys again next time.